All right, so I remind you that we have a test on Thursday. It will be on the part of the material from the first 7 labs that we did not cover in the other half of the test. So that means classes, objects, probably an array of objects, so some kind of parsing. So you'll make a class, you'll parse some data. It's probably going to be that rather than the JSON, because we'll deal with, there'll be more JSON coming. So it's probably going to be parse some data and make a class from that data. And then I usually have you throw it in a drop-down list and display stuff when they choose something, and then there's more. You're making a cart, or you're doing a search, you're searching for things that match your criterion, or you're adding things to a cart, or whatever I can come up with. And if you have any good ideas for a theme for the test, let me know. And I like pictures, and I like movie clips from YouTube. So don't expect everything just to be text. I like pictures. What else? So that's the test Thursday. And then I am also reminding you that it's registration time for those people not seniors. Look at the fall classes, pick some out, never take me again. Okay. All right. So okay. So I posted a new homework. The homework is just to play with some interesting sort of elements on a page. So an accordion sort of is a way to put a lot on a page, and yet sort of it, like an accordion, it expands and contracts, so the user can make it small and out of the way, and then can expand it. Tabs and do sort of the same idea of, you've got a lot of stuff on the page, but the user's choosing among the things which to see. And vertical tabs is the same sort of idea. Tabs is just, instead of the tabs going across the top, they're down the side. And these combine HTML and JavaScript and CSS. So instead of, for this homework, instead of having a separate part for HTML and a separate part for CSS and a separate part for JavaScript, they're all combined. But these are, I don't know, particularly easy, because you're just going to pretty much like copy and see that these things exist, and you're just supposed to put your own content in there. So I don't want, if their example is cities, I don't want to see cities. I'd rather see you tell me what you're interested in, if it's not insulting or pornographic or anything. Okay. So that's the new homework, not due since break is coming up, and we've got tests going on, and this stuff wasn't due until the 7th. That stuff won't be due until the 21st. Okay, and then the new topic is timers, because React went and gave me a new version, yet another new version of React for me to fight through, and I'm not haven't had the time to fight through it. So I'm going to jump over and do timers, and then we'll cycle back after I find a couple of hours to fight through the newest React. Okay. So timers, nice JavaScript topic. Nice client side thing. So I'll show you rolling die first. That is going to play with 2 different types of timer. Okay. So I just have a die. I hit a button, really obnoxious purple button, and it rolls the die for a few times, and then at some point stops. Okay. So this is going to involve the two types of timer. There is a repeating timer that you start off with the command or the code setInterval, and that is a repeating timer. And then there is a one-off timer, a timer that waits a certain amount of time and then executes a function once. So the repeating timer executes something over, executes something, lets a little bit of time go by, executes something again. So the repeating timer, the interval timer, is sort of like a loop, and then it's going to be repeating. Whereas the sort of the one-off timer is just going to wait some amount of time, do something, and that's that. It's a little bit more like an if. Okay. So what is that going to look like for us? Let's look at some code. I've got some style. There's my purple button. Here's my image and my input button. That's all that's on the page in terms of HTML. And I'm doing nothing fancy in terms of JavaScript. I just went back to the very old-fashioned on. So usually when I'm introducing a new topic, then I simplify all the other JavaScript and go back to very simple on click. But if you want to add a listener, by all means, go ahead. Okay. I have, I'm going to have two timers, and I like to give my timers an ID. So timer is not an element like on the page that you can see, but it is still sort of a code object that you might want to interact with. In particular, the repeating timer, we are going to stop it. So we need to in order to stop a timer, we need to be able to identify the timer, and so we must assign it an ID. But it's not there, it does not exist here in design, so we're not sort of dragging it out onto the page or assigning it the ID ourselves. It will be assigned an ID by the system, but we will need to know it so that we can play with it later. It will be given an ID when we instantiate the timer, and we will that will be in a particular function. And then when we click the button, that will call a function. That function is going to instantiate our timers. That's where the IDs of the timers are going to be established. And we are going to need to know those IDs at other times. And so therefore the IDs are global. Okay. So we have two each. I'm not going to use ID timer 2, but I'm putting it there out of principle, and I might want to have it. But I am going to need the first one. Here's my function called by the clicking the button. So I have up in the button the on click. It calls start roll, and start roll is setting my interval, and this starts the repeating timer. And I say the name of a function. This is one of the few times that you give the name of a function without the open close parenthesis, because when you use a name with open close, it often invokes your function, but we don't want our start roll code to invoke the function. We want the timer to invoke the function. So it's just the name of our function roll but no parentheses. Okay. So I am using setInterval. This is a built-in method. Probably belongs to the window or something. And it has two arguments. The first argument is a function that is going to be called by the timer, which I must then define what I want that that function to do. And the second one is an amount of time in milliseconds. And so I'm choosing a 100 milliseconds, and a millisecond is 1,000 of a second, 1,000th of a second. So 100 milliseconds is a 1/10 of a second. And this is the set interval is going to be the repeating timer. So it's going to be repeating every 1/10 of a second, or 10 times a second, if you will. Okay. I do not want the user to be able to click the button while this timer is going. I have two timers identified by timer ID and timer ID 2. I don't want the user to establish any additional timers. And so this is where I'm establishing timers in start roll. And so I disable the button so that the user can't click it again and establish more timers. So you want to be able to control the amount of timers. You don't want them to be able to, by working with your interface, make many timers. In this case, 2 will be enough. We could do it with 1, frankly, but I'm doing it with 2. Okay. And here's me starting the second timer, setTimeout, and the setTimeout method instantiates the type of timer that is, I've been calling it the one-off. You are going to let a certain amount of time go by, call the function, and that's that. And so I put here a longer time, 1,000 milliseconds, which is 1 second. So this overall goes on for about a second. If you in your function, my roll function is being called every 100 milliseconds. If I am giving it too much to do, then if it takes longer than the 100 milliseconds, the timing may be off. So you can't necessarily trust this timing that it is like, precision timing, especially if you have your function doing a lot. Okay, so that's it. Click the button, calls the start roll function. The start roll function establishes 2 timers, a repeating timer with set interval and a one-off timer with set interval. We tell the functions that are going to be called by those timers, in the first case roll, in the second case stop roll, and we say the amount of time. So the repeating timer is repeating every 100 milliseconds. The one-off timer is repeating, is not repeating, is just going to do something once, but it's going to do it after a delay of 1 second, after 1,000 milliseconds. The first timer was the repeating timer called roll. So here's my definition of roll. I am getting a random number between 1 and 6. So this is our sort of standard math library used to get a number between 1 and 6. I am using that to set the image of the die. So I had an image element with image die as its ID. I'm changing its source, and I'm concatenating together here the file name. Die with a capital D, some number between 1 and 6, and .gem. And that function gets called repeatedly. And then this function gets called after a second goes by. And I am clear the interval. So this is the method called by the second timer, but the second timer stops the first timer. So there is a clear interval. Clear interval means find the timer with the ID timer ID, which I established in start roll and remembered globally, so I do know it. And I'm going to stop that repeating timer. So clear interval goes with set interval, so that they are both about a repeating timer. And then I am enabling the button. I don't have to clear out the other interval because the other timer, the set timeout timer, because it only goes off once and this is the once. That timer can be stopped if you want to say, do something in a minute from now. So that would be 60 times 1000, 60,000 seconds or 60,000 milliseconds from now. But if somebody did something on the page in the meantime and you said, no, never mind, I don't want to do that timer thing anymore, then you can stop the one-off timer. So a repeating timer, if you don't want it to repeat forever, sometimes you do, but if you don't want it to repeat for the lifetime of the page, then it will have to be stopped. It's slightly less likely that you'll have to stop a one-off timer, but you might, and it's possible. All right, so that was example 1. Questions, example 1? No. Okay. Example 2 is what I call rabbit timer. So what does it do? It just adds rabbits to a page. It's so exciting. Okay. It just keeps going on and on forever. This timer doesn't stop. Even if I get to be 1,000 rabbits, it doesn't stop. All right. So what was that? There was a header. There was a div. So there's a rabbit there to start. Here's my script. At the bottom of the page, there is no button. There is no function. Is there a function? There is a function. Okay, there is a function. I can do this without a function, but I did it. Oh no, I need a function. Of course I need a function. I need the interval call function. The timer, I'll get it right yet. The timer, the establishing of the timer is not done by a function. It is just in script at the bottom of the page. So when the page starts, the timer is established and starts its job. So I don't have to, when I open the page, it just begins. So that is done by this, with the script at the bottom of the page. Another way to do that is to do it in the body's onload method. Pretty much the same thing. Okay, so I just have a script at the bottom of the page, establish a timer. It's a repeating timer. It calls a function called makeBunny, and I'm calling it every 500 milliseconds. So that's every half second. Okay, here's my function, makeBunny. I'm using createElement. I can just use pure concatenation if I want, but I'm using like createElement and append child kind of approach here. So I'm saying here's I'm going to make an element called new rabbit. I'm creating a new element. It's of the image type. I'm setting its attribute, the src attribute, to bunny.png. I'm giving it style a height of px. When you are working with style, and style typically wants things to have numbers. So if you're doing a very old-fashioned width or height property of an element, you can get away without establishing a unit. But if you're working within style, and here I'm working within style, then it wants units. And that is a thing that will prevent your code from working if you forget the units. If you're trying to in code change the style and you've forgotten units, your code's not going to work. Okay, so here I'm setting an attribute of the source, and here I am changing the style of the new element and changing its height to 150 pixels, so all the rabbits are the same size. And I am appending that new rabbit element to the page in the container called div rabbits. And that's a lot of rabbits, okay. So that was fun. Timers, questions, no. Okay, so the next one on my list is the Snoopy timer. So let me find the Snoopy. Okay. So in some obnoxious blue page, Snoopy skates across and then reaches the end and then starts to come back. So, and then he reaches the other end on Snoopy Go and turns around again. All right, so here's that page. There's a Snoopy image. I have, as you can see here, two Snoopy images facing each the two different ways. I don't know if there's a filter to flip an image horizontally. I'll have to look that up. I might be able to do it in this day and age with one image. Because you can do more with images in HTML these days than you used to be able to. Okay. So, but I have two images that are the two Snoopies facing the opposite way. GIFs and PNGs. GIF is the old way to do it. That is an image that can have transparency and let the background show through. And PNG is the more modern. So this is a very old program with .gif Snoopies, but my rabbits were PNGs. Okay, so here we have the script. I'm establishing the style is very important here. So let me point that out. Here's my image. I gave it some what we call inline style. The style, I'm not styling an image up in the head with style tags. I'm very explicitly styling this image, not all images, but this image, and I'm doing it right in the tag. And if I want to move something, HTML in general, it does its own layout on the page, depending on, if something comes later, if something follows something else, then it is put later on the page, either to the right or below. But if you want to control, and then it just fills in the items in the order that it finds them. But if you want to control absolutely where something is on the page, then you need to style its position. Say HTML, I'm not leaving it up to you to decide where to put things. I'm going to tell you where to put things. And so this part up here, if you want to use a timer to have things move around on the page, it's very important that you get the style right. If you can have all the JavaScript right, but if the style's wrong, it's not going to work. So here's the style. It's got a property called position, which we're marking as absolute. That's going to allow us to place the image sort of anywhere, not leave it up to HTML. I'm going to give it a particular width. So that's telling me how wide Snoopy is. I typically, with an image on a page, I typically do not style both the height and the width. If you style one but not the other, then it will maintain the original aspect ratio. So when you have an image, it has a height to width ratio known as the aspect ratio. And if you style one but not the other, then it will be magnified or shrunk proportionately and maintain the aspect ratio. If you style both, then you may pervert the original aspect ratio. Maybe you want to, but I don't want to. I want Snoopy to have this proper Snoopy aspect ratio. So I'm only styling the width here. And then I'm giving Snoopy a left, and that's what's going to change. That's what's going to move him across the page. Okay, so here is my script. I have a timer. I'm not going to stop the timer, so I didn't need a timer ID, but I always, in principle, like to have timer IDs. Snoopy just goes on skating forever and ever in this one. The left is going to be me determining where Snoopy is. So that's going to be the variable controlling where Snoopy is. My change is going to be what I'm going to, each time interval, how much I'm going to change Snoopy's left position. And my change will change. It's going to be +5 when he's going to the right. It's going to be -5 when he's going to the left. I have to get the original page width to figure out when to turn Snoopy around. I want him to go off all the way off the page before I turn him around. But the page gets bigger. This is a funky thing about an HTML page. Then we have to wait till it gets to the other side. But when he gets to the other side, so this page has a particular width, and then the page, when Snoopy gets over to that right-hand side, the page is actually going to get larger. But I have a variable which I remember the original size of the page, so then I know, based on the original size of the page, when I should turn Snoopy around. That's page width. And then I just wanted to know what Snoopy's width is, though I know it's 121. But in case I were to change it in style, I'm going to get this width. Okay, here's my timer. Again, this timer is set up just in the script at the bottom of the page, so nobody sort of calls it. It's just when the page starts, this setInterval is called, and it starts calling the function move Snoopy every 50 milliseconds, which is pretty regularly. Here I did have the parentheses open, close. That means that my function gets called immediately, right away, and I don't, the very first call of the function does not wait 50 milliseconds, but 50 milliseconds is pretty fast, so it's, one can't sort of see that difference. The real problem is like with a set timeout. You don't want these parentheses on a set timeout, because the whole idea of the set timeout is to make it wait. And if you have the parentheses, it won't wait. Okay. Here's me grabbing the width of the page, window.innerWidth, and I'm parse inting that. So parse int will do different things for us. One thing parse int will do for us is if it is any kind of has any fractional part, is going to strip off the fractional part, and that's the int part of it. But another thing it will do is it will strip away any units. So the widths and so on, I told you they have pixels. And if I want this to be, it has some units, typically pixels. And if I want to do some math or a comparison, I don't really want to do math, but I want to compare something to the page width, then I want numbers and I don't want text, so I want the unit stripped away. So parse int will strip any unit away, will strip any fractional part away, and will say to the code, I am a number. So it's not going, when I do a comparison, it's not going to do a string comparison, it's going to do a number comparison. Okay, good. So I got the width of the page. I got the width of Snoopy. So again, I knew that that was 121 or something, because that's what I set it as. But just saying, showing you I can get the width of something that's on the page. And then here's my move Snoopy function. I have some variable, as you recall, called my left. I'm going to add to my left my change. And I'm going to make it the new left of Snoopy. So I'm going to the page, getting the element with the ID in Snoopy. I'm going into its style. I'm going particularly into the left part of the style, and I'm changing it to the variable my left, and I'm adding a unit. If I don't add the unit, Snoopy doesn't skate. You need to add the unit. If the left of Snoopy gets to be bigger than the page, not the page at some instant right now, but the page, I'm getting the page when the page started, I got the width of the page. And the width of the page is dynamic, but I want it when it started. So this is when the page started, I got it once and that was it. But if the left of Snoopy gets to be bigger than the page, Snoopy went off the page to the right. So I change my change to -5. So now Snoopy's going to start heading in the other direction. And I change the source of Snoopy to the other image. So he's facing the right way because Snoopy doesn't skate backwards. Snoopy probably knows how to skate backwards, but in my program, Snoopy only skates forward. Okay. And then if my left gets to be negative of Snoopy's width, that means that we went off the other edge of the page, because the other edge of the page was 0, but I wanted Snoopy to be entirely off the page. So I wanted the left to be less than the width of Snoopy. So Snoopy moved all the way off the page. And then I set my change to a +5 and the source back to the original Snoopy, and he's moving to the right once again. Questions, anything? Okay. So that was all the ones with images. Now I'll do one without images, just to show you that it doesn't need to be an image. No, I don't need to say it. Timer. Here it is, timer. So timer is just me using JavaScript timer to make a timer on a web page. So here's my timer, and I can start it. And then that start button sort of turns into a stop button. So then I can stop it. And I can start it again from where I'm at. So I'm at 4:59, and I can start it again and stop it. But I can also clear it. It goes back to 0 and restarts. And then I'm starting from 0 again. Okay, so that's fun. Here's the HTML. There is an input that I made read only. I gave it a font size of 5 rem. So there's a sort of a standard font size for a web page, and I'm making the text in my little input here 5 times larger than normal. So that's why these are such big numbers here. I'm giving a width of how big that cell is. I'm right aligning it. So I'm putting it over on the edge. So if this number gets to be bigger than 10, it keeps it. It's basically as number should be, aligned the way number should be, right aligned. And I gave the font Courier New. And Courier New is a monospaced font. So in a normal font, a 1 is thinner than, say, an 8, and it would sort of, the width of this thing would sort of jiggle around. But by choosing a monospaced font, it keeps that dot in the same place. So that was because of my choice of font. So sometimes the choice of font matters a bit. Okay, so a monospace font. Okay, I have two buttons. I have a start button and a clear button, and I'm going to change the functionality of the start button to also make it a stop button. There's a different way you can do this. You can have three buttons, a start button, a stop button, and a clear button, and you can play with the visibility, play with the display property of the buttons, and make sometimes the start button have a display and sometimes the stop button have a display. So you can say, you can have an element on your page and set its display, which is part of the style. You can set its display equal to none. And then it's not on the page and doesn't take up any space on the page. But I'm doing it with one button. I'm just going to change what the button says and then act according to what the button says. But there is another way to do it. So I'm just telling you there's another way to do it. Okay. This time I went for the add listener. I guess I'm getting more sophisticated. I'm having a click event called start timer and clear timer. I have my timer interval. And I'm going to have a time that I'm going to have ticking by. And then remember, and then pick up from there. So I'm going to have a time that I need to remember, so it's global. Things you need to remember are global. So I need to remember the timer ID so I can stop the timer, and I need to remember the time. So those are both global. The button start calls start timer. And start timer, that's the same button for starting and stopping. So the first thing I do is say, if the value is equal to start, then I'm going to do the start stuff. Otherwise, I'm going to do the stop stuff. If I'm doing the start stuff, the first thing I do is change the value of the button to stop, so that the next time I hit the button, it's a stop button. I'm disabling the clear button. If it's running, I don't allow them to clear it if it's running. They have to stop it, then they can clear it, but they're not allowed to clear it while it's running. Clear is disabled while I'm running, but if I stop, then I can clear. And I'm calling what I call tick. So tick is a function. I'm calling it every 10 milliseconds, every 100th of a second. So I'm going to increase my time by 1/100th. Okay, so that's if it's the start button, change what the text says, disable the clear, start up a repeating timer, set interval, call the tick function every 10 milliseconds, every 100th of a second. If it's the stop button, which is the else, then make the button say start. Enable the timer, or sorry, enable the clear, I should say. And stop the timer, clear interval. The clear method sets the time back to 0 and sets the display of the time back to 0. And the tick function, this is the repeating function, increments the time by 1/100th and displays it with 2 decimal places, 2 ticks. Questions? No. Okay, what are you to do? I've given you a spring and a weight. And those are not transparent, so they've got a white background. So if you want it to look good, then you'll keep your page have a white background. So I usually make you change the colors. This is one time I'm not making you change the colors. I want the page to be white. I have, in this case, I have 3 buttons, different than what I just did, a start, a stop, and a reset. And basically, you click the start button and the spring should stretch. So we're not changing its position, we are changing its height. And then, but at the bottom of the spring is the weight, and we are changing its top. So unlike Snoopy, it's most like Snoopy, but Snoopy was moving horizontally and this is moving vertically, but it's somewhere between timer with the start and the stop and the reset, and somewhere between the timer and Snoopy going back and forth. Except this one's going up and down. So Snoopy, we're changing the left, and this one will be changing the top of the weight and the height of the spring. Okay. Any questions? No, stop recording.